Welcome to Working Class Hollywood, conversations with people that make the movies, TV shows, and entertainment you love. If you're looking to break into or move up in the entertainment industry, or you're just a fan of content and want to hear about how it's made, this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Jeremiah Smith.
If you can make people's lives easier, if you can just start solving problems without overstepping your bounds, you will make it in this business.
My guest today is Andrew Wantuck. Andrew is the supervising producer on the Jim Jefferies Show on Comedy Central, and Andrew and I had a great chat. He told me the story of how he got his first job in Hollywood by knocking on the door of a comedy club, and then how that led to a very prosperous career in the entertainment industry. Andrew shares some really good behind-the-scenes information about how they put the Jim Jefferies Show together, what it's like being in the writer's room there and producing all those awesome segments that they do on that show. And then Andrew flips the script and asks me about working on Vanderpump Rules, and we do kind of a deep dive on how we put the Vanderpump Rules episodes together in post, and what goes into working with the cast of Vanderpump Rules. If you're a fan of comedy, if you're a fan of the Jim Jefferies Show, or if you're a fan of Vanderpump Rules, this is a great episode, and we go really deep into what it takes to put these TV shows together. So with that, let's get to my chat with Andrew. All right, I'm here with Andrew Wantuck.
Yeah, you got it right. You nailed it.
Did I pronounce it?
Yeah.
I was really nervous about that, actually. Well, thank you. Thanks for coming out, man. I appreciate it.
No problem.
And let's just dive right in. So where are you from, and how'd you end up in Los Angeles?
I was born in upstate New York, raised outside of Detroit, went to school at Arizona State, and moved to Los Angeles immediately after that.
Did you go to school for like TV film stuff?
No, I went to school for engineering.
Okay,
and
good.
I got into an improv and sketch comedy group.
Oh, you're one of those assholes.
Yes, I'm one of those schmucks. And I was in a differential equations course right before I had to get on stage on Thursdays. And I remember I was so excited to get on stage that I was just completely ignoring differential equations, and I did not get a good grade in that course. Left engineering, got into marketing, which somebody once told me that marketing's not even advertising. Marketers think that they're advertisers, but they're not. They're it's like the cheap version of advertising.
The poor man's advertising.
Yes. And then came out here right immediately after that in 2001. 2001.
And so did you have a job lined up? Did you just pack your car and drive across,
Yeah, I graduated. I had an internship at a real estate company. Had no idea what I was really going to do, but I loved comedy. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to move out to Los Angeles. I'll figure it out. I've also always just wanted to live by the ocean, even though I don't live by the ocean now. I'm close though. Close enough. And I moved to Hermosa Beach thinking that was Los Angeles, but when you get here you realize it's not super close, but it was a great place to live right out of college. And on a Monday, I put on a shirt and a tie, and there was a comedy club down there called the Comedy and Magic Club. And I went and I was like, I want to work in comedy. I've got a degree. You're supposed to put on a shirt and tie. I'll go down there. I'll knock on the door, and the guy that opened the door was the owner of the club. His name was Mike Lacey. And he said, hi. And I said, hi, my dream's to work at a comedy club. And he said, all right. He's like, well, what do you do? And I'm like, I just got a marketing degree. And he's like, oh, that's great. I need help getting people to this comedy club. And I'm like, I would love to help you get people to this comedy club. And he hired me. And so I started out kind of part-time in the office, figuring out how to get people to the shows. But he also was like, well, I want you to learn every job. So my very first job was I was a door guy, and I watched the parking lot on top of a comedy club, and eventually kind of got my way in there. So that was my first gig.
Wait, that is crazy. So your first Monday in LA, first job interview.
Totally.
Just nailed it. Jesus.
Well, I was interviewing again, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I remember I lined up a job to be in like pharmaceutical sales. My dad was like, "You've got to get into pharmaceutical sales. That's the business."
I thought only hot chicks worked at pharmaceutical sales.
Well, yeah. So somehow I lined up one of those interviews. I remember like just bombing that interview. I went into that and did not get that job. And simultaneously, knocked on the door on that Monday and got a job at a comedy club, and it was like the greatest thing ever.
And when you came out here, like, what were you said you loved comedy, so you wanted to work in comedy. Like, what plans? Like, if that first like serendipitous opportunity hadn't worked out, what was your kind of like overall plan?
Oh man, I don't know. I truly don't know if I had a plan. I probably did PA on like. So my roommate at the time, a guy named Nick Wegner, that's how I think we have connected.
Right. Nick
through
is Joe Chandler.
Writing partner at American Dad.
Right. First episode of this podcast, one of my best friends, growing up.
Right. And so I lived with Nick Wegner, who's now a Hollywood writer, and I did comedy with him at ASU and Bear in Mind and Farside. And he had a job, I believe it was at Kilburn at the time. He was like an intern at Kilburn. So... and he knew people right out of the bat. He had people that he was like, "Hey, we need help PAing over here." He's like, "I could help you get in a PA job over there." And so I think I did that for a couple of times too. So I probably would have gone down that route and just gone right into production. Television production, had I not done the comedy club thing.
So you ended up at the comedy club.
Yeah.
And so how long did you end up working at the comedy club?
So I've had literally I've been out here 17 years, and I've had 3 jobs in LA.
That's unbelievable.
That's
really good luck.
Yeah, it's strange. So I was at the comedy club until 2009. So I was there for 8 years.
That's insane.
Yeah, and it was just such a great job. So I was on the door, and then I eventually was a server. I was the sound guy. Then eventually back office. I was the group sales guy. All the way up to, I think I gave myself this title, but eventually on a card, it was written Vice President of Sales and Marketing of the of the Comedy and Magic Club, and it was like a 10 to 6 gig, and I would like punch out at 6 p.m. and then just stay there and hang out with the comedians and watch the shows and
that room gets like big names. Like that's a place that Jay Leno goes up every Sunday.
Yeah,
and
Jay
people
Leno.
Come through. Like that's a good room, right?
Yeah, Jerry Seinfeld shot a lot of the documentary Comedian there. Chris Rock, whenever he was working on the Oscars, would do all of his sets there. Oh, my favorite, my third day. So this was talking about serendipitous. My third day, they gave me an office in the back office. And George Carlin was headlining that night. And my office shared a wall with George Carlin's green room. So I was there at 4 o'clock working on, whatever promotion we were going to do for next Tuesday night. And through the wall, I could hear George Carlin working on his entire act for hours.
Oh,
just
my God.
Constantly going over every word. And I was just looking around by myself going like, this is the greatest job in the history of mankind.
I'm getting like serious career envy, actually, because like I was like a huge comedy nerd growing up.
Yeah.
Like Joe and all our friends, like we were just like super into like the alt comedy scene,
Sure.
whatever. And we were driving up to LA to go to shows. And when we lived here, we were like, just like we were like comedy rats. Like we'd go wherever people were playing. And stuff,
I was too. So I mean, it was just the great. So I just couldn't believe I was getting paid to watch professionals do this. It was unbelievable.
Did you continue your improv and your performing? Were you doing stand up yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I took level 1 groundlings, passed that. I took level 2, didn't pass that, and about that time I was probably like 25, 26, and just realizing that I've said this before to friends. I think part of it was working at the comedy club probably got my performing side got intimidated by watching Carlin and Seinfeld and Chris Rock, and I think eventually I was just like, oh, I'll never be that good. I've got to work in this industry. I'm not going to be on stage. And I wish at that time, and I still think that's true, and everything in my career has gone exactly. I'm very happy with my career, but I wish somebody would have said like, no, it's a tough road of it at the beginning. You got to stick with it. If that's what you're passionate about, get on stage as much as you possibly can. Keep doing that. Keep going for it. But I was watching all these pros going like, yeah, I'm never going to be that good. I need to do something else.
I had a similar experience because I also, I was performing. Like I did a lot of theater and then got into comedy and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And like I think I hit a point where I loved it and I enjoyed doing it, but like I just didn't have that like deep hunger to make that my only thing that I was willing to do. Which those are the people that succeed in comedy and performing acting. Like you can't like. They don't leave themselves like a plan B.
No, you
and
can't
they, like,
dip your
starve
toe in the
themselves.
water.
Yeah.
It's just not possible to dabble in that. That's something you got to like eat and breathe and live and constantly get up on stage. And yeah, I just didn't have that drive. Not to mention if having performed, if I did have some high highs, but if you eat it up on stage once or twice, it is the most brutal business in the entire, like, you're just like, what am I doing with my life? I thought that was a good idea. Oh my God.
Who were some of your favorite comics, just in general, like from that time?
I liked Chris Fairbanks. A guy at Groundlings that I still love to this day is Steve Little.
I don't know those guys.
Rory Scovel. He just got a show on Comedy Central. Another guy is Nate Bargatze, but that's kind of later on. Early on, Daniel Tosh was on stage, and he was just like destroying audiences. There's another guy named Nick Griffin. I don't know if you've heard that. These are kind of indie stand-up names, but people in the stand-up business know Nick Griffin. He's one of the funniest people. He moved to New York City. Absolute genius. Let's see. Other names that... Kyle Kinane I'm a huge fan of Kyle's. Did I say Nate Bargatze? I love that guy currently.
I'm going to have to look all these guys up and watch
Yeah.
specials,
Well, and when you're working at a comedy club, I mean, you're seeing all these amazing performers that just haven't broken through yet. That they're doing 15 minutes every single night in front of an audience, just honing the craft. It's fun.
Awesome. Yeah. Super cool. So you worked there for like 8 years, you said, and then what happened? Where'd you go from there?
So I was working there, and we were starting to like shoot a lot more. So we had these captive audience, 250 people. So we'd start to shoot things before the show with the comics, promoting their gigs and writing little jokes for them so they could promo their shows. And Daniel Tosh, I was doing that. I was making this video actually for George Carlin. He did this piece, and we got all these other famous comedians to shoot a little snippet of one of these vignettes that he had written. And in honor of George Carlin passing away, we got all these comics to do this piece for him. And Tosh saw me like going around, and I was shooting this with everybody. And I think that's what possibly led him. He asked me to come on the road with him and be his tour manager. And he was like, why don't you shoot everything that happens on the Tosh Tour 2010? I did that, and we filmed a bunch of stuff. And we got back, and he's like, hey, I don't know if that documentary stuff's going to go anywhere, but why don't you come into the Tosh.0 offices, see if you can dig out any footage from that, and we'll see if it can be an Act 4 on the show or an Act 3 on the show.
So he had his show at the time?
Yes, he did. He already had Tosh.0. He had 2 seasons of Tosh.0. And the show was huge ratings, and so he had this huge tour in 2010, and he needed a tour manager. And he's like, you know how to run a comedy show. Now I just need you to do the same thing in a different city every night. So
And did you quit the Hermosa Club?
Yep, I quit the Comedy and Magic Club and went on the road. So I quit everything basically for a 60-day gig just to be like, all right, well, this is going to be fun. I got to try to do this. And so we went on the road and did that. And with no guarantee that I'd have any sort of job after that 60 days, but the owner of the comedy club was great. He was like, "Yep, you got it. If this is what you want to do, this is what you got to do." And I did that. And when we got off the road, then Daniel was like, "Well, I still want you to be the tour manager. Why don't you come work on Tosh.0?" And so I did that.
And what was your position on Tosh.0?
There really wasn't a position at first. I remember I was in a cubicle and I had all these. I mean, I think I had 80 tapes of just shooting. Matt Fulcheron, who's another great comic that I love, and another guy named Jasper Red, who were on the tour bus with us, and then Daniel and his girlfriend at the time. I was just shooting them hanging out on the bus, and so I had these like 80 tapes, and then shooting the shows and shooting behind the scenes and all this stuff. And so I was just sitting there editing all of this footage. And he was like, find the best moments and we'll see if we can put it together on for Tosh.0.
And what ended up happening with that footage? Did you ever do like a documentary, or did it end up on?
Yeah, no, I didn't. I was working on it for a long time. Like there's still some like probably 3-hour or 4-hour long string outs that would be, I'm sure they're interesting. I haven't even looked at them in 9 years. But no, we probably got 3 or 4 segments out of that footage and put it on the show, and that's ended up what happened to it.
Gotcha.
And so that was my first thing. I was just kind of editing, but I wasn't an editor. I wasn't really editing. I was doing string outs.
Yeah.
That way, I was putting together maybe little stories, and then as we realized we'd kind of looked at all the footage that was shot and we had all that, he's like, well, what? He looked at me. He's like, well, what do you want to do now? And I just kind of looked around the office, and I could tell that the producers were the ones that were just always needing the most help with whether it was casting or locations, or it always seemed like they were the team at that particular office that just needed help. And I'm like, well, I'll go help out those guys. And had no idea what a producer did, but just said like, I'm here. I want to work hard. Can I help you? And there was a guy that kind of took me under his wing. His name was Jeff Salmon. And he's like, yeah. And I remember the first project he gave me, we were going to do a web redemption down at the Van skate park in Orange County. And in the script, it needed Tony Hawk was going to be interviewed by Daniel, and it needed an empty pool. And so we're like, well, how are we going to get this empty pool? And we hired a location scout, and we're like, see if you can find an empty pool somewhere in Orange County, just so the day moves faster if the locations are closer to one another. And this location scout was working for like a week or two, and was like, there's no empty pools. It's not going to happen, And I just remember this producer was like, well, we have to have an empty pool. So I just hopped in the car. I looked on Google Maps first. I looked at all the people that had pools near the Van skate parks, and I wrote down their addresses, and I just started cold knocking on doors. And I like the third door, I got this guy, and he's like, can I help you? And I was like, hi, I know this is going to sound unusual. Can I convince you to drain your pool tomorrow?
No.
To have us shoot in your pool, and I have this much money, a couple $100. Will you drain your pool? And the guy's like, Tosh.0, yeah, sure, I'll drain my pool.
See, I saw that going like a slightly different way, just knocking on people's doors and asking like, by chance is your pool empty, like whatever. No. But no, like that's even weirder.
So weird.
To be like, hey, could you drain your pool for me?
Yeah. So I was like, can you drain your pool for me? And the guy's like, yeah, sure. And I remember like it took like an hour to get down there, but I solved the problem in like 45 minutes, and I went back up. And I told this guy Jeff, the producer of the show, I was like, yeah, we've got here's this guy's name and number. He'll drain the pool for this much money. He's starting to empty it now. If you let me call him and pick up the phone, we're good to go. And I just remember that guy he was just like, nice work, man. Like I just remember I solved problems. Like that's kind of what I've learned what producing is you just kind of run into the fire and you start solving problems for people. And you can advance that way. That is
that's a huge move. Like that's like super creative. Like that's a really good story.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to talk to you too about like what you do in your job, because you're a producer, I'm a producer, but in like very different areas of the entertainment industry. So I'm excited to talk to you about that. But it sounds like maybe like the common connection between just like producing, what that means is like solving problems, making things happen, working quickly, like that kind of
thing. There's like a psychologist part of the job. There's a hustle part of the job. There's, a collaboration, getting everybody in the room, figuring out who's the best person that actually can answer the question that you have. I love talking to other producers about what producing means.
Yeah.
In terms of.
Well, let's get through your career just so I can
sure.
finish up where you are now at the Jim Jefferies Show. So how long were you at Tosh.0?
So I was at Tosh.0 from 2009-10 to 2016. So I was there for for 6 seasons, I believe. I think.
I mean, that's a great run too.
Yeah.
And this is like a year-round gig.
Yeah. 30 episodes a year for I think they're about to start season 11. And so, and I think the early seasons weren't 30, and I think maybe they're doing 20 episodes a season now. But for every season I was there, 30 episodes, like a year-round gig, very consistent, awesome job.
I know you working. So I work freelance.
Yep.
In reality, we're all freelance. So like, we don't get any benefits. We don't get paid time off. No, no health insurance, anything like that. Is it similar in the scripted Comedy Central world?
Yes, for producers it is. I mean, for the writers, they're pretty well taken care of in terms of benefits, and
they're part of the union. And stuff,
the WGA
right?
takes care of them. Directors, the DGA takes care of them. But producers is this kind of nebulous term that doesn't necessarily have. I know they have the PGA, which is making strides, but still no benefits yet. So
I think they refer to themselves as they're not a union; they're a professional association.
A professional association, yes.
I'm in the PGA, but mainly just for the screeners.
Yeah, totally. So no, I didn't have paid time off and didn't have benefits, but because I was also Daniel's tour manager, that worked out well for me because I would produce on the show and then immediately go on tour. So I actually, I was working year round just with, weekends and when Tosh.0 had a hiatus, it usually meant that means we were jumping on a bus or in airplanes and going to gigs.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then so was your next gig the Jim Jefferies Show?
Yes. So the next gig, I was working and I got as high as producer at Tosh.0. I went from associate producer, segment producer was the titles that I had at Tosh.0, and then got an offer to become a supervising producer, which is where I'm at now for the Jim Jefferies Show.
And how did they find you, or how did they know you?
So the showrunner at the Jim Jefferies Show was also the director of Tosh.0 for years. He was the stage director and the field director, and kind of rose up through post, was an editor, was how he got his start. And we became friends because we actually did, a lot of people in Los Angeles know this, or in New York too, there was a Doritos commercial competition for years.
Oh yeah.
For the Super Bowl. For like 10 years they had
I remember.
The Super Bowl, and one day, his name is Scott Zabilski, and he came to me and he said, "Hey, I want to shoot a Super Bowl commercial on spec, and I need help. I need somebody that does what you do. I need help casting. I need help with locations. I need help with just dotting the I's, crossing the T's. I need a producer." I said, "Okay, I can help you." He's like, "When do you want to shoot?" Like, he goes, how early do you think we could shoot?" And from Tosh.0, the scripts sometimes would come down on Mondays, and you'd be shooting Tuesday morning. So we were pretty good at just the machine of turning these shoots around.
Yeah.
And I think he asked me, he's like, "When do you think you could shoot this by?" And he showed me the script. It was great. And it was a Wednesday. I'm like, "I think we could shoot this on Friday." And we got the casting together. We did it. We shot it on Friday, and we ended up winning the $1 million Super Bowl commercial.
Oh, no way. And
yes.
So you ended up being like actually aired during the Super Bowl?
Yes.
What was the commercial? I feel like it
was called Middle Seat. So it was about it was on an airplane, and our main character was sitting down, and he had this middle seat that he was trying to protect. And all these cast of characters is walking by, and for various reasons he didn't want them to sit down, and all of a sudden he spots an attractive girl kind of coming his way, and he pulls out the bag of Doritos trying to say like, "Hey, you should sit next to me." And she looks at him, he looks back at her, and all of a sudden the person in front of her moves forward, and there's just a like snot-filled, disgusting baby that's like on her chest, and he's like, "Oh, this isn't who I wanted to sit next to me." And well, that was it.
If I can find
by the way, I said disgusting baby. That baby is Scott Zabilski's kid named Jax. But I meant in the
yes. You made him up to look disgusting. He's an adorable child, I'm sure. Well, if I can find a link to that on YouTube or something, I'll put it in the show notes if people are listening and want to look at
do.
it. So you won the $1 million. I mean, did they just like cut you a check for $1 million? And that was
it was Scott's commercial. So Scott won the $1 million, but he took care of everybody that worked on the crew and the cast, and I don't think there were a lot of expectations. Like everybody was doing this for like, yeah, sure, we can put this together, and so it was an amazing experience to be part of that. And I threw he actually got to go to that particular Super Bowl with his wife, and there was 10 finalists, and it's this big deal of like 2 commercials will actually air and one wins the $1 million. I threw a party here in Los Angeles just for 40 of our friends, and my mom and dad came down to watch the Super Bowl to see if our Super Bowl commercial was going to air. And like right when it aired, like I just look over and my mom's crying, and like I was just like, oh, this is crazy. That
is so cool.
Yeah.
So he is now the showrunner.
Yes.
Of
Jim Jefferies Show.
So they reached out to you. They needed someone, and
right. So they shot this great pilot with the Jim Jefferies Show that I didn't work on, and now they were fully staffing up the show. And the idea behind the Jim Jefferies Show is that it's got these international field pieces. So Jim goes all over the world, showing you these interesting stories from, say, upcoming, we're going to go to Australia, South Africa, 5 cities in Asia. So we cover these interesting stories that like, oh, I didn't know that was happening over there. And then you put it on the lens through America. Is this either a cautionary tale? Is this going to happen here? Or is this country doing it way better than America? And then Jim kind of goes through and explores and investigates, etc. So he's like, I need somebody to help. You've come from the field. I need somebody to help run the field department and just make sure that we can do this, because we're going to have to ramp it up to the point where there's going to be so much working internationally with international fixers and production companies and all the paperwork that goes along with that, and the casting and the travel and the accommodations and the logistics and a bunch of exciting, boring stuff depending on the way you look at it. And he's like, this is going to be a lot of work. Can you help? And I said, yeah, sure. This sounds great. And I took the third job I've had in LA, and I took the leap and went over there.
That's amazing. So, okay, I had never watched the Jim Jefferies Show.
No problem.
Until last night.
Oh, all right. Doing the research for this podcast.
I
did.
like
it. Which ones did you see?
I watched the last 2 episodes of season 2. So I think the last 2 that aired.
So you saw the citizenship episode?
Citizenship episode, yeah, which was like amazing.
Oh, great. Thanks.
It was really good. And I also watched one of Jim's specials on Netflix, because here's the thing. I didn't know Jim Jefferies. And my first introduction to him was him being a total asshole to me and my crew while we were shooting Vanderpump Rules.
Oh, no.
So I wanted to tell you this story. So we've been shooting Vanderpump for 7 years now, and this was 2 years ago, I think. So this was season 5, and we shoot all over LA, and we have we've shot a couple of times at the Improv on Melrose.
Mm-hmm.
One of the girls in the cast.
I've heard this story from
He's
Jim.
told it. He's talked about it on other people's podcasts. But, basically we're shooting our show or our scene at the Improv. They went and saw a comedy show, and then we're in like the front bar room after the fact. And we'd shot there. This was like the 3rd time we shot there, and every other time it was like on an off night or like early or whatever.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, this show was like a Friday night at like 11 o'clock, and we came out after the show to set up, and shoot at the table.
It was tight in that bar.
Packed.
Right.
And also there were like a dozen comics that were there just hanging out, either getting ready to go on or just like, just drinking or whatever. And all the comics were fucking pissed that we were there. Like they were just like, it was like their turf, their territory.
Right.
We're in there. We're obviously like, asking people to like either like, oh, you just mind just like stepping out of this, or you like whatever. Mm-hmm. And so they kind of like group like started haranguing us, and like we're just like, I was like the guy there that was like, I was like the field director, like basically directing the cameras, and they just like started coming up to me and like hounding me and being like, what are you shooting? What are you shooting? Have those people signed releases? Those people in your background, have they signed releases? And I'm like, yo, man, it's like we're like really focused on these guys at the table. Yeah. Like if you show up and like we see your face, we'll ask you for a release, but like we're not like focusing on anyone. Like, oh really? So my friend right there, he's not in your shot. I'm like, yo, I'm just like trying to shoot my show, like totally. Whatever. And then some guy walks right. We were at a table, like right in the middle of the room, right? Some guy walks up, like right in front of the table, and like drops his pants and is like mooning our cast, like right behind, like right in the background of our shot. And it's like, who is this fucking asshole mooning our cameras? Like, the fuck? And so like, our cast member Jax, one of the main guys on the show, he like flips his lid and he's like, "Who's this fucking guy? Get him the fuck out of here! Like, we're trying to make a TV show here." And that guy that was mooning the cameras was Jim Jefferies. So I'm talking. I didn't know who he was. Like,
sure.
I had heard the
I'm
name.
sure he was just trying to make like the guys at the bar laugh.
Yeah. So like, the manager at the time, she might still be there, Paige. I'm like, "Yo, Paige," and she's like the sweetest
She's
person.
the greatest, yeah.
I'm like, "Paige, like, what, can you help me out? Like, what is this guy?" She's like, "Yeah, that's Jim Jefferies. I'm not gonna do anything. He can basically do whatever he wants." And I'm like, "Oh fuck, all right, whatever." So we finished making it. So that was like, to date, one of like the most frustrating like days of Vanderpump Rules. But so I left and I was like, just like, fucking steaming, like these fucking asshole comics, whatever. And then like 2 days later, I hear Jim Jefferies is going on Jay Moore's podcast and told that story on Jay Moore's podcast. And I heard it from his perspective. And I was like, I kind of like, I totally see where he's coming from.
Yeah.
Like, you're like a pretty like successful comic at the comedy club that you do get,
Totally.
sets at all the fucking time. Some Yahoo reality TV show comes in the door and is like telling you to move and telling your friends or not, like, and he was just trying to be funny.
It's just two storm fronts coming together.
Yeah,
It's
like,
a
I don't-
recipe for disaster.
I don't like hold it against it, but I never had seen his comedy, so I was just kind of like, I was predisposition to just like kind of not like the guy because of that experience. But last night I watched 2 episodes of the Jim Jefferies Show and his latest Netflix comedy special. It's like, fuck, goddamn, that guy's fucking funny.
Yeah, he's
a genius. He really, really is.
Yeah,
so.
he's a brilliant guy, and I'm sure if he met you, he would just be like, "Hey, I'm sorry, I mooned you."
Oh, dude, I would not even care. I would laugh about it at this point. Like, I don't give a shit. Like, it was like that night was frustrating, but at this point,
my question
it's funny.
to you was how was the footage from? Did you guys end up using?
Yeah,
that?
I think the footage ended up going in the show, and it was fine. I mean, like, what ends up happening in these scenes, and it's it's one of the things that like I've come to realize that actually like helps me not be stressed out all the time, is that we shoot for like hours and hours, and they talk in circles, and they talk about everything, and what ends up going on TV is maybe 90 seconds of that, 3 minutes of that, or whatever, and like it's just really rare that you're in a position in editing that like something happens that you're like, well, that scene's ruined, like can't use that anymore. It's like there's always a way to cut around it, and especially
there wasn't a way to lean into it either.
No, because none of them had signed releases, and like it was just like that was, and then we have to be so picky and choosy about what stories we tell. So it's like we were following the story of, if I remember correctly, it was like someone had showed a picture of Jax's dick in the comedy show, and his girlfriend is upset about it. It's like, so that was our story. That's what we're telling. We're not telling the story of like the disgruntled comics like harassing us, harassing our production. You know what I mean? So we could cut around it. It went on TV. It was fine. Like it was, it didn't hurt.
It just
the show.
slowed down your night, and that's all.
You
just want to get home to your family.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm just like
Yep.
trying to like do my job, make a good show. Our camera guys are like, they're like, what the fuck is this guy doing? And like, but at the end of the day, it's like, who cares? It doesn't matter.
Yep.
It was fine.
Have you been back to that location since?
To shoot, I don't think so. I think that was the last time.
Was it because of that incident?
Probably. It was just a lot. Well, also like I think the girl that was doing comedy, Kristen, doesn't do comedy anymore. It was kind of a short-lived career, if you want to call it that for her.
She dabbled.
And it was actually Kristen's friend Rachel O'Brien, who I think is also friends with Jim in some capacity. I don't know, that was there and whatever. But we haven't been like, she hasn't been around as much, so no, we haven't been back to shoot there.
All right.
But getting back to you and the Jim Jefferies Show, it's fucking awesome. Like I'm all in on this show, and I've only seen 2 episodes.
Yeah, I think we found our stride. It's fun. The international pieces are really interesting. Jim at the desk always has like a take and a slant on the news that's a little bit different than what everybody else is doing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I absolutely love working on the show.
And so you're the supervising producer. Like,
Yes.
What do you do?
Okay, what does a supervising producer do? So, I guess the way I would describe it is, if everything's going well, I don't do anything.
Okay.
But on a TV show, it seems like there's always something that's some sort of problem that's popping up every single day. So I feel like it's my job to go into every single department on the show and I annoy everybody a little bit, and it just kind of I make sure that everything is running. So my day-to-day duties are we going to have a field piece in the show that week, and how are we going to get it made in time for it to be vetted properly in air? So a lot of my time early on in the first 2 seasons of the show has been dealing directly with the field, international travel, getting Jim over there, getting Jim to agree, from the pitch of a story to the development, meaning calling the characters that are going to be in that story, getting the locations locked down, and then all the way through the post process. The story, did we get the pre-production story, the script that we wanted to get, to the story afterwards? Sometimes you don't always get every detail that you wanted to get, so we've got to tweak the story to get all the funny in there and then put it on the air. And then on show days specifically, I deal with legal and MML and S&P and all of these terms that non-Hollywood types might not know, but there's words that you can't say. So there's people saying you got to bleep this and you can't say that. And if you make fun of brands and advertising that are in the script, you've got to check with a department inside of Viacom to make sure that you can make fun of Coca-Cola that particular day, or some sort of fast food company that's an advertiser, or you can't say that KFC's chicken isn't chicken and stuff like that, because they're spending a lot of money on the show. To legal, you can't defame people, so you can't say things about somebody that aren't necessarily true, or you could be open to lawsuits. So, and then we have a huge digital department, a big team on digital, so I make sure everything's running okay there. I'm in the writer's room, so as the script's being written, a lot in our particular show, a lot of our Act 4s, or even sometimes our Act 3 or Act 2, will have a part of that segment that needs to be produced. Like, we're going to put a green screen in, and we're going to put a back plate, and then Jim's going to float down from the sky and pretend he's landing on Mars to do
I watched that episode.
To do that particular segment. To casting. So early on in our show, we were doing a lot of celebrity interviews. So I was working with casting's a little different than celebrity interviews, but with booking, we had a booking agent on our show, and we'd make sure that the interviews were lined up, and so I was making sure that schedule was coming together and everything was going to be fine there. To casting, am I boring you?
No. I'm listening, and I'm trying. I'm trying to parse out. So it's like essentially the writers or Jim would have an idea for a segment, and then it's your job to sort of like make that a reality.
Correct. And also sometimes I have to push back. So the writers. We have a lot of great writers on the show, but sometimes they don't always have their producing hat on. So they'll come up with an idea. I wish I had a good example of one right now for you, but they'll come up with something that just isn't quite pretty. Like, guys, that's going to cost $60,000, and we would need it here by tomorrow. That's just not possible. We're gonna have to rein that in a little bit. So I'm in the writers' room, and I'm also telling people what's possible. Like, we don't have the money for that. We're not going to be able to shoot that. Oh yeah, like I don't like to say no very often, but once in a while there's just some ideas that aren't going to be able to be executed in the amount of time and for the money that we have. Right.
Do you deal with money? Do you do budget stuff, or
no,
is there
I don't.
separate?
No, there's a line producer on the show, and there's a co-executive producer that are both that come from that world to make sure that I don't actually deal with the budgets, but I am in the writer's room knowing, like, you guys, that's not possible. I'm not even going to go to our line producer and ask her if that's possible. You're crazy people.
Right. What's like your favorite segment that you've produced in the 2 years that you've been there?
My favorite segment that we've done is probably my favorite segment is a piece we did in Stone Mountain, Georgia. So Stone Mountain is this giant. I had never heard of it before. One of our field producers pitched this. It's this giant rock. It's basically the South's version of Mount Rushmore. So it's got Robert E. Lee, Jefferson Davis, and Stonewall Jackson on this, giant dome rock.
I've never heard about this.
Yeah, it's like 30 minutes from...
And they're all like Confederate generals.
Generals and the president of the Confederacy. So while like most of the country is tearing down these old Confederate statues, 30 miles outside of Atlanta, Georgia, you have this giant rock that has been carved. Robert E. Lee's eyeball in this thing is the size of I think it's 20 yards wide. It's just this giant rock formation. And it's at this, this seemingly beautiful park, but you're like, all right, we've got some semblance of a problem here. So we went and we went down there and we talked to the NAACP in Georgia, and they're like, yeah, like, look, there's a problem. This probably needs to come down. And then we talked to these like Civil War reenactor type guys that are, actual racists is how I would put it. And they're like, this is our history. We can't change our history. This absolutely needs to be, stay put. And so you have this controversy. And then all while we did the story, edited it, we had it in the can, it was ready to go, Charlottesville happened. So then you had this, white nationalist movement, and everybody was talking about it. And Jim had an amazing piece from the desk on how shitty it was that these white nationalists are marching. And then we paired that with this piece saying, hey, I think we really need to look at Stone Mountain possibly coming down. And so when you paired, you had this national, conversation happening, and then we had the perfect field piece to accompany that.
Right.
I just felt like we were making important TV. I was like, this show's like awesome, and it was really funny. And so, it's funny. I thought it was important. I loved working on it.
Yeah, that's something that I really noticed about it too, is that it is very funny, but it's also very smart and kind of like, it's like pointing finger at hypocrisy and kind of like calling out ignorance, and it's
exactly.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. So, I think that was one of my favorite. I mean, we've gone to Israel on the show, and we've done pieces on circumcision. There's a movement inside of Israel called intactivism. There's people saying that we shouldn't be circumcising children. And so, we've gone on the ground and talked to people in the streets of Tel Aviv to find out if this is something that should change, should it not change. And we've gone to Amsterdam. We've did a ride along with the police in Amsterdam. We were in the car for 3 hours. They didn't get one phone call for any sort of crime. So it turns out if you legalize, all the drugs in Amsterdam,
yeah, exactly.
There's no crime. We've just traveled all over the world covering.
You guys do really
interesting
pieces. What do you love most about your job?
I think I love working with the people. Like the way I'd answer it is the solving the puzzle of you've got to make 22 minutes of television every week, and seeing how that comes together and the collaboration and the different. You really become a family when you're working on a television show, from the showrunner all the way down to the PAs. Everybody's working together, and so I just love the challenge of not having anything, and then a week later you've all worked together and created something that hopefully you're proud of.
What's your production schedule? You do 30 episodes in a season?
Next year we're going to be 20 episodes. We're going to do a winter run off in the summer, and then back in the fall run. And so so the production schedule next year is a little different. We did 30 this year, which was pretty brutal. We started in March and basically worked all the way through the year without any real hiatuses. So this year we'll have a nice summer hiatus, which I'm looking forward to learning, meeting my kids.
And so like how far in advance are you meeting your kids? How far in advance are you prepping an episode? Like, is it written Like
from the majority of the show is written that week, and then the field pieces have a longer production cycle. So those we tend to be about 4 to 5 weeks ahead on the field stuff. So we'll be in the can on those, or those will be edited, and we'll be able to move a couple of them around. But then we're already thinking about like, all right, well, where is Jim going next week? Oh, Jim's going to Edmonton. Let's find a story we can cover in Edmonton. So he's doing stand-up in Edmonton, and then we'll get on a plane and follow him there and try to cover an interesting international piece from wherever he's performing globally.
So you're moving a little bit ahead of like the stage portion of the show, which is much more like kind of real-time responding to the headlines and that kind of stuff.
I mean, as we're evolving, we're learning that we tend to like some of the more stand-up-y kind of topics, meaning... So instead of like just like exactly what the Daily Show does, like, okay, here's this week's news, or this is today's news. This is what everybody's talking about, this particular story. We find we're still talking about what's happening in the news, but we like to maybe go from pull back a little bit and say like, all right, well, let's talk about Mars. Should we be going to Mars? Okay, what's Elon Musk saying about Mars? Jim, what is your take on us going to Mars? And so it's not necessarily like not everybody that week was talking about Mars, but it's still kind of in the zeitgeist.
It's not necessarily ripped from today's headlines, but it's topical.
It's topical, yeah.
Gotcha.
Exactly.
How involved is Jim in the just like the creative and the writing direction of everything?
Very involved. I mean, in the writer's room, handpicked the team. They're always the writer's room is like my favorite place to be on the show by far, just because of. They're brilliant people sitting in there talking about very, challenging topics, and then how we're going to cover it. What's Jim's voice? So Jim's in every single writers meeting, challenging them. They're challenging him, and they're pushing and pulling, trying to figure out like what's the best Jim Jefferies angle on that piece.
Mm-hmm. And what's
Jim Jefferies Show angle on that piece?
Right. What's your relationship like with Jim? You guys close?
Yeah, I'm on the road with him. I mean, I'm the guy that knocks on the door at 8 a.m. before we're doing a field shoot, and he probably had a show the night previous, and so I'm the first guy to say like, hey, get up, we got to shoot today. So usually it's like, fuck you, give me 20 minutes, and then as soon as you get a cup of coffee and a sandwich, everything's good. Yeah, I mean, I think I would say we're as good as you can be as a producer star of the show. Like my job's to make his life as easy as it possibly can, and make him look as good as he can on television. So I think there's a professional respect there. And then we've hung out, we've gone to Dodger games together. His kid and my kid are friends, and so yeah, I think it's pretty good.
Nice.
Yeah.
What do you not like about the job? What's the worst part?
Ooh, what's the worst part of the job? I don't love. I don't dealing with some of the legal challenges or even I guess what I'd say is, so when you've got this piece, you're working creatively to figure out like, okay, how are we going to cover this topic? How are we going to cover circumcision? How are we going to cover this? We're going to go to the demilitarized zone in Seoul. Okay, how are we going to tell this story? Well, it turns out there's these North Korean defectors. There's these North Korean defectors that are YouTube stars in South Korea. All right, well, what if we talk to them? All right, so what's our story here? We're going to talk to these defectors. We're going to go to the DMZ. And so you're working really hard to try to figure out how we're going to put these puzzles together to tell a 6-minute story. And in doing so, you've got to write this one sheet and eventually a working script to get out to the network, to have them give you notes and feedback and to make sure everything's copacetic, that we're not going to cause some international incident that Viacom's going to have to clean up later.
Sure.
And just the process of like, sometimes it can be so draining to get to figuring out what we can do, but that takes all your energy. But to then have to go to all these other departments in this giant corporation to make sure they sign off and that they're covered. that to me is like my least favorite part of like, so you're getting all these notes from all these departments. They're like, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that. And by the time what you have left, you're like, is there anything funny still here? Like, or are we going to have a piece here?
Yeah.
So
dealing with the suits is the worst, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's not, there are a lot of great people on the other side too.
I know.
Everybody's just doing their job, but like when
it can be stifling to the creative process.
Yes.
We deal with the same shit. Like you want to go shoot somewhere or do a scene or and then it's like the location or the the person that won't sign a release and that like fucks your whole thing. And
yes,
like,
and the person that like tells you like you didn't get a release, so now we're not going to be able to air that, and then you got to be like, well, we've got to air this. This is the best thing that we got from that shoot, so we're going to have to figure this out, and like all that push and pull and that process to me is my least favorite part of it. Like there's lots of just logistical checks and balances that you do. Like sometimes I find myself sending emails to be like, I want to get this down in writing, so in case this blows up later, I can be like, well, I wrote you an email on that.
Yeah,
like,
the cover your ass email.
The cover your ass email is my least
that.
fucking favorite part about producing.
It sounds like there's a lot of similarities in what we do, and I certainly a lot of differences too. But it's like overall, I think.
Because the field pieces that we shoot are definitely in. They're scripted, but when you're doing an interview with somebody, an interview doesn't always go the way you think it's going to be. Even if you pre-interview somebody, Jim might dig something out, and that's kind of a story that you've got to follow a little bit. And so you have to be nimble in these field pieces. So there's a reality element to them, and that's why the teams that we've built are a lot of reality-based people. A lot of our post people come from the reality world because they're so used to being able to dig a story out of something that they're experts of. As a matter of fact, that's something I wanted to ask you because I saw in your resume you have all this story producing experience. And so I imagine when you go in and you shoot 3 days or 5 days of Vanderpump, like who's watching the footage real time to be like, oh, here's these storylines? Like, is there you as a field director, are you in charge of being like, oh, that we're going to follow this storyline later? Or do you just shoot in the field and then you're going to find all this later on down the line?
A little bit of the more of the second. So we don't shoot episodes. We just shoot for 3 months and we get what we get. And we, every day we're talking and deciding what stories are kind of bubbling to the surface, what we need to follow.
And you're trying to create controversy, right? You're trying to like poke the bear a little bit, or are you really just letting them be
we don't try to create controversy, and every reality show is different. Like some are more produced or more even scripted than others. Like we've been very blessed with this Vanderpump Rules cast. They create their own conflict and they create their own stories. Mm-hmm. We don't have to do a lot of work in that department. It's more about just like knowing what the story is and then just deciding the best way to tell that story. So, if I know that, Stassi is frustrated with Katie, two of our cast members, I'm just making this up. Like, if I know Stassi's frustrated with Katie about something, then it's like, okay, well, like, what scenes do we need to tell that story? So, like, all right, let's get Stassi talking to Kristen, at their apartment to kind of set up. Yep. And we'll get Katie on her side talking to her husband. And then we'll.
So you're building to this.
Yeah, and then it's like, all right, and then we have this party tomorrow night, so we'll get them to talk about whatever their conflict is there. We didn't create the conflict. We never tell them what to say or what to think.
You may have nudged them both into the kitchen to talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. So we always say we produce the scenarios, we produce the situations, we don't produce the content, I guess.
Yep.
What it really comes down to with them is it's just like having like a really close working relationship with them because this is the story of their lives. It's not scripted at all. Like we do not create or fake stories on Vanderpump Rules. So we just we have like myself, like that's a big part of my job is just knowing the cast and knowing what's going on and knowing how they're feeling every day to day, especially during shooting. And then we have a talent producer and someone that works under her. These two talent people whose job really is just like dialoguing with the cast, for like logistical purposes, like giving them their call times, that kind of stuff, letting them know what's coming up, but also just like, like talking to them and getting their feelings about stuff and knowing. So that's kind of becomes like our source material in a way.
Yeah, so after they talk to the cast, you'll go talk to them to be like, any gems that you found? Should we? Any avenues that we should?
And we're talking all day, every day, and like we're in a big bullpen.
So how far ahead do you have to? So if you find out you know that party's tomorrow, right? Where you're going to nudge your 2 cast members to have this confrontation. But the next day you're shooting too. So how do you know what you're going to do the next day as well?
We plan in we plan in as far in advance as we can, with the caveat of knowing that everything could change at any minute. So
right, like how does that work for location? Like, do you ever have to like send a producer in 10 minutes before they want to go into that place and to try to be like, do you mind? We have a couple of cameras. We just want to get a dinner scene. Would you sign our location? Like,
I think we have done that. That's not standard practice. Like, so we have a segment department, and in reality, I don't know, maybe it's different in your world, but like, so on our side, the segment producers, they're like basically the location department. So we don't really use location managers.
Mm-hmm.
We have 2 or 3 people in the office that are full-time booking locations, and then other stuff that comes along with it, like like any, I don't know, like any experts or any doctors. They could do all the legal paperwork for like whatever, whoever they're going to visit. So they're working ahead of us. So we try to plan as far in advance as we can. A lot of stuff sticks. Like, we know that's like, this day is so-and-so's birthday party. They want to do XYZ. Segment will start working on that to clear it for that day because that's the day of their birthday party. That's not going to move. But we do a lot of last minute changing, and we have to work really hard to stay like nimble enough that we can change things. I mean, it happens every week where like we shoot a party until 1 or 2 in the morning, and then based on whatever happened at that party, we've got to like blow our whole day up the next day because we thought the story was going to be these characters who are going to wake up with them and then go do this or whatever, and it's like, oh no, something came up, so like, we got to like figure out, we want to follow these people instead. So we're like up at 2:00 in the morning on our laptops, like on the phone with each other, being like, oh, what location? So they also pre-clear a bunch of locations.
So you have safe spots.
There's just like, okay, so we need like some cafes, some bars, some restaurants, parks, like whatever. And it's like, so those are like, they keep them in their back pocket. So it's like, if we run into a place where it's like, we need to send 3 people somewhere tomorrow to talk, 'cause that's where the story is. Where can we send them? And it's like, okay, segment, what do you have? Like, oh, we could send them here, there, whatever.
Will a cast member ever say like, oh yeah, I'm not gonna, I said I was gonna do that, I'm not doing that, I'm gonna go with them? And then will you let them do that, or are you like, no, we've planned everything about this, you've got to do this?
We try to give them as much as much leeway and freedom to make decisions about what they want to do, as long as we can cover it for story. So if it's like,
But do you have to deal with a lot of this? Do you kind of run into these fires? If somebody's giving you a problem and your segment producers aren't able to handle it, that's when you have to come in and say like, look.
Yeah, and especially with the cast, I tend to do more like fire extinguishing with the cast, because I've known them for so long. Like I started on the show season 1 in 2012, and the cast was like, they didn't have a penny to their name. They were all just waiters and bartenders, and they've since gotten very famous and are very well compensated for the work they do on TV and on the internet and all this appearances and whatever.
So they're a big fan of yours. They're like,
we have a great
people
great
that
relationship.
Were there at the ground. They're like, this person, we owe this person. On some
and they
level.
trust us. Like trust is crucial when you're making a show about people's lives when they come back year after year, because like if they don't trust that, like if they say something or do something that you're not going to twist it and make it into something that they didn't mean to do,
right, then
they're not going to remain open to you, and they're not going to just be themselves and be honest. And that's what makes the show what it is that this group of people is like just willing to just bear it all and be open and be honest in front of the cameras. So a big part of our job is encouraging that and, reasoning with them and just convincing them to be open and honest and not hide things and not lie to us. But yeah, I've been doing that with them now for 7 years. So some of the newer producers, the younger producers may not be able to get, Jax or
You have
Stassi to show up or to like talk about something, but I've got I
got
can
some
just
credit.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just a relationship, So I can just call them up or show up to set and be like, yo, what the fuck are you doing? Come on, like we're here to make a show. Like, do you want to make a shitty show? You want to make a good show? Like, come on. So yeah.
I like that. I've also said, what the fuck are you doing? Do you want to make a shitty show? Or do you want to make a good show?
So yeah, it's I don't know where do we start with that. Oh, but like so you asked about
I hijacked your interview.
That's okay. So we shoot for 3 months. Meanwhile, we have a whole separate post team. It's we work out of the same office, but it's pretty well separated.
And you came up from that side? Is that how?
I kind of came up from both sides. Like I started as an associate producer, and then I was segment producing and field producing. But I also started story producing. So I was like, starting with season 1 of Vanderpump Rules. At the beginning, it was just, it was like a 3-month gig, and I had to fill the rest of my year in. So the reason I got into post is because I was on the road for this National Geographic show. First, I was on Extreme Makeover Home Edition, which is a road show. So I was traveling for back and forth for 9 months. My wife got pregnant. And then I took this National Geographic show called Border Wars, where I was following border patrol agents around every day for 5 or 6 weeks. And I missed the entire 8th and 9th months of my wife's pregnancy with our first child. So I got back from that show.
I barely made it home from the road for my wife's, for our second kid.
For the birth, actually?
For the birth.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, my wife, she picked me up from the airport, and she was 8.5 months pregnant or whatever, and she looked at me and she's like, if you want this to work between you and I, you better figure something else out, because I'm not going to do this travel shit anymore. And I was like, okay. So I made the effort to get into post.
I've also had those similar conversations.
Yeah. It is hard in this business with the hours and the travel to maintain good family life. But so I tried, I learned Avid, which is the software that we edit everything on. Do you guys cut on Avid?
We're Premiere.
Premiere. So, yeah, all of reality for the most part is Avid. So I learned Avid. So the story producers are working in Avid, and they're the ones that go through the raw footage and do the initial string outs before it goes to the editors. So I got one of those jobs. And so I was doing Vanderpump during the summer, and then doing story producing in post basically the rest of the year. But I went back and forth.
That's nice, though. So you were able to have better relationships because you were in one place as a story producer. You got to stay in town for the most part.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So that's the benefit of post. If you work in in reality, especially is most shows post in L.A. So regardless of where they shoot, the footage comes back to L.A. and there's a whole team of story producers and editors that are putting it together in post. So on Vanderpump, I do mostly field on that show. So I'm overseeing the 3 crews and dealing with the cast and just, working with the showrunner and the segment producer and everything every day to decide okay, what are we shooting and where are we shooting and planning the trips and whatever. But then once the footage starts rolling in, there's a co-executive producer. There's 2 co-executive producers that oversee the post department. And then every episode has a story producer and a story editor. So the showrunner and the 2 co-executive producers will sort of do these very rough episode outlines just on cork boards with index cards.
Do they start doing that immediately while you're even shooting, or
yes.
Are they doing that once the 3 months comes?
No. So they're doing that
continuously.
So they're maybe a week behind, 2 weeks behind the footage, and they're doing that. They're doing those structures just purely based on hearing what happens in the field and then reading field notes. So we have loggers that go with each crew and just kind of take notes about what happens and write summaries. So they'll take those summaries and start carting out scenes. So it's like, oh, this scene, this happens, this scene, this happens, and they'll do these very rough episode outlines. And then that outline goes to the story producer and the story editor, who watches. So they get basically like a 3-day window, 4-day window of footage, which is
and
about
they have to start here and get to here, and then somebody else is keeping an eye on the bigger picture. To keep getting all those episodes.
So they watch every minute of footage within that timeline window. So they become the experts on that footage, and they start stringing it out.
That's fascinating.
And and then it goes to the editor, and and then through the season, I mean, the show posts for like 40 weeks or something like that, 45 weeks. It's almost a year-round thing in post. And
now, do you give your own wave of field notes, or do you have such good people? I'm not throwing anybody, but do you just actively every day give some notes to people, or
on post on the episodes, or in the field?
So you shot in the field. Do you take careful notes of what you think are important moments, or not really? Are you just like, we've got loggers and we'll move on? What are we shooting tomorrow?
I don't take notes per se. Like if something, usually what I'll do if I'm on set and something happens, I'll tell the logger to bold that, start that, like that's a big moment. Cause we also have these super teases that are like 90-second trailers for the whole season. And those are like a whole beast to find all those moments and everything. But yeah, so the loggers, take the notes, goes to the story producers, and then, to the editors. And then obviously during the season, during post, the scenes and what is the episode shuffles a lot because, then you start getting notes from the network, and it's like, oh, we need to bring this scene in here. But for the most part, something that is also, I think, unique in the reality world is that almost everything plays chronologically. So when you watch the show, a lot of reality shows, they'll just start borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. Be like, well, there's a scene that we shot in May that they talk about this. We could pull that over here, and it makes sense. And da-da-da-da-da. Like Vanderpump Rules, those stories move so quickly, and things change. So from 1 week we'll be talking about this and this and this, and a week later, all that feels like old news, and we're on to the next. So the episodes for the most part just play chronologically. So
that's nice.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a little bit into what we do.
Yeah, I loved it. Thank you for that. I hijacked your podcast.
No, I don't mind talking about what I do. I love reality, and I love Vanderpump Rules, and I'm super proud of what we do, and it's a very
it kept your family together.
It has. I mean, when I started, I didn't have children. My wife was ready to leave me because I'd been traveling so much. I lived in a shitty apartment in Silver Lake, and now 7 years later, I've got 2 kids. We own a house in Burbank, and my wife is still with me. So
congratulations.
I think I owe a lot of that to Vanderpump Rules. So what do you what would you say to people that are listening to this that they want to get into the industry, they want to work in TV? What advice do you give to young bucks, up and comers?
In terms of breaking into the industry, I think it is, and I've heard this said on this podcast before, your other interviews, that your network is pretty much everything. Every job I've ever gotten is because of somebody that I've either been friends with, or I did have that knock on the door, but your network is how you're going to get jobs. So I think you can never, try to, if you can take people out to lunch, if you can talk to people that are doing jobs that you think you'd be interested in, pick people's brains, and that's by far the best way, I think, to get jobs in this business.
One thing I'll say about this, someone told me this, or I read this or whatever, but it works. If you're trying to make connections and trying to meet people, and never email or reach out being like, hey, I need a job, or hey, I'm looking for work, whatever. You appeal to people's vanity and just be like, hey, I'd love to like just take you to lunch and like pick your brain. I'd love to just like learn from you, hear about what you do, like hear your story, you know, and just like make connections, meet people, and eventually through that, you know, then someone will think of you.
If you constantly are doing that, if that's like part of your just the way you operate, and you're not trying to get something from somebody, but you're just folding that into your existence, I think eventually you're going to know so many people that it's going to be inevitable if you are at all diligent about what you do and decent at following through and working hard. You will make it in this business, in my opinion.
For sure. And where do the people that in your world, where do most of them come from? Do you feel like do people come up through the comedy scene?
Yeah, so most of my network early on was all these different comedians, and then some people that were door people and servers and people that worked at the back of at the comedy club. And now I've watched all of these people that work in different capacities in the industry. So, you know, the comedians at the Comedy Magic Club, some have gone on to huge television shows and are tremendously successful. And then some servers are like amazing artists, and I'll see it at art openings and I guess what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that like everybody that you meet at some point in your early career, they're going to go on to big things, and if you're sincere in that friendship, and you're good at what you do and what you're passionate about, that it'll be amazing to see your path, because it's just inevitable that's going to happen. These people are going to go on, they're going to need help.
Yeah, you find your tribe early.
Yes.
Make these connections and just stay in touch with people.
Correct.
And socially, just hang out with people.
Yes.
Like, you know, this is a very social business.
Yeah,
it's a very social industry.
So my early network was all these comedians, and then I went to Tosh.0, and you know, people would come and go there, and the people that were there for 2 seasons have gone on to all these other amazing shows, and I'll randomly get an email like, "Hey, we need help in the whatever department. Do you know somebody, or could you do this?" And so it's all these people along the way from these jobs that will constantly amaze me at what they're doing now and what they need help with, or what they're looking to do. So yeah, it's stay in touch with those people in those early jobs when you think are not important or you're just a grunt. That's going to end up being your whole network in this town.
Yeah, totally. What's the best advice that you've ever been given?
The best advice I've ever been given was from Mike Lacey, the owner of the Comedy and Magic Club, and he taught me to never ask for small favors, because you never know when you're going to need a big one. So what I took that to mean was, you know, I have friends in my life that always think like, oh, hey, can you get me this, that, and the other because you do this? Well, there's no such thing as a small favor. Like getting something small, it's still, I've got to stop, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. Yeah, great. I'll probably do it for you. But I took that in and I really digested it. And now I'm thinking, I try not to ask anything from anybody. But one day, if you really need something, you know, that's the time to go for it. But
don't spend your favorite currency.
Yes,
on
something small.
Yeah,
like you're gonna need something big one day. So
I love that.
Don't
That's
ask
great.
for a lot.
I really like that. Does he still run the?
He still runs the Comedy and
club?
Magic Club. He's been running it for I think they just celebrated their 40th anniversary. They started in 1978. I mean. And he knows everybody. Like he was a really great guy to mentor under.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
In your mind, like, what's the best way to, like, you know, get ahead if someone's in like a lower level job and they like want to, like, you know, get that next thing? Like, how do you advance in this business?
To advance in this business, if you can make people's lives easier, if you can just start solving problems. Sometimes you can see problems coming sometimes that maybe a supervisor or an executive producer doesn't see. If you can solve those without overstepping your bounds and just make people's lives easier, people never forget that. You know, I always call them killers, just people that just start solving problems and make your day go faster. Those people advance. I've also seen people that are always just kind of, you know, the people that think they deserve more. to me, they just slow you down. Like nobody. I'm just a big believer in that. Hard work in solving problems is how you advance, and people don't forget it.
So you killed it when you convinced that guy to drain that pool in Orange County. You were the killer in that situation.
I think he was surprised at how fast that problem got solved, and I think it was going to be a big problem for him, and he just never forgot it. Like that next day, he was like, "You should move." He's like, "This desk is open. You should move into this office."
Wow.
And I just was like, "Yeah, I'll solve whatever you need. I'm here to make your life easier." And he was like, "Yes, I like people like that."
And so what else do you want to do? Like, where else do you go from here? What's like, what do you hope to do in your career?
I love this job currently, so I just want to keep, I really think we're making a good show, so I want more people to watch it. But long term, I'd love to run a show. I'd love to stay in comedy and work in comedies for as long as I possibly can. Like, I love them working with these mad geniuses that are hilarious and get to help them fulfill a vision. So I'm close. Like I could stay working where I'm at right now forever. I'm a happy camper.
That's awesome. Well, Andrew, thank you so much, man. This has been amazing.
Yeah.
Super fun.
Thank
super
you for
interesting.
having me.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. I enjoy the podcast. So keep doing this because I'm a listener now. I like listening to how people's origin stories and how and where they got to in this business.
I appreciate that. Thanks again, man.
Yep.
Okay, that was my chat with Andrew Wantuck. What a great dude. I really liked that guy, and I really liked talking to him. I hope you enjoyed listening to our conversation. If you did like that episode, do me a big favor. Go on to iTunes or Spotify or wherever you're listening to this and subscribe, rate it, leave a review. That's really going to help get the word out for this podcast, and so more people can hear these episodes. Thank you guys so much. I'm really enjoying putting this show together every week. I'm having a blast. I hope you're enjoying listening. Stay tuned. I've got some really good episodes coming up in the future. I've already got some great interviews in the can that I'm going to be editing in the next few weeks. So stay tuned. There will be more. They will be awesome, I promise. And I will hopefully see you guys next time.